All right, go for it.
Good morning, everyone. It's the one and only V, the Guerrilla Economist, coming to you live on this edition of Mornings with V and CJ, aka Rogue Mornings. You can follow us on roguemoney.net. Check us out on Twitter at the Rogue Money, Rogue Money Facebook, Steam It, DTube, and every other single platforming app known to humanity. I mean, we're just everywhere. You just Google us. We're everywhere. We're everywhere. Okay, you Bing it. If you Bing us, we're there too. Anyway, CJ's working the airwaves, and we got a great load of stuff to go through. And we have the one and only London Paul with us as well. He is back. Well, he was here. He was here Monday, but he's back again today on Wednesday. But this is a great time for me and Paul to catch up because he was in Russia. He was in St. Petersburg, actually talking with people with critical thinking capabilities. And for those of us who are, awoken, who are awoken to the goings on and the musings of madmen in this world. London Paul is no stranger to us, and we all know how refreshing it is when you're meeting someone in another country and they quite know exactly what you're talking about and they're on the same wavelength as you. Because let's be honest here, folks. Many of us are ostracized from family. Many of us, our family members think we're weird. Many of us bemoan when we show up to Thanksgiving dinner and they're like, here he comes again. Oh, here she comes again. Well, it's quite refreshing to be in another place in the world where people are awake and are shocked and incredulous as to the certain things that the mass majority of those of us who live, not the us who are part of programs like this, but the masses that are out there in the United States and what they believe in. So, Paul, how's it going, buddy?
Yeah, good morning, V, and obviously good morning, afternoon, evening, and middle of the night. I don't know where everyone else is listening. Yeah, I'm just saying the weather's incredible here, and we have to make the best of it in the UK because we don't normally get sustained spells of nice weather.
Yeah, it's carpe diem every single day as soon as the weather gets good. Like when May rolls around, late April, early May rolls around in New York, same thing, man. It's like carpe diem, seize the day, enjoy as much as you can because you know that hellish cold is right around the corner.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, so
before we begin, I like to start with the funniest article of the day. Sometimes you find those gems that are just hilarious. Sometimes you find something that is the universe once again invalidating all that is SJW and libtardian. And this is one of the things here, Paul. Customers rage as Starbucks turns into a homeless shelter. I love this.
I mean, yeah, it's kind of it's ironic is that a lot of people will moan and complain about things. It's like you get a lot of celebrities going on about how we need to take in all these immigrants, and then people say, "Well, will you have one living with you?" And then they make excuses why.
I would never have one.
That's not possible. No, I couldn't possibly do that. So yeah, you have this kind of sanctimonious attitude where they say it, and then of course, as soon as it becomes a reality and it's on their doorstep, then they lash out and get very angry about it. And obviously, yeah, the Starbucks story is a great example of that. Well, yeah, they've turned them into homeless shelters, and
yeah, that's great. It's great. This is what happens. It just shows you how insatiable the left is. It just shows you how insatiable. I mean, look. I mean, there's a picture of a guy in this article, CJ. If you scroll down, and this is the problem. My better half told me if they do this, because the Starbucks CEO is like, we welcome everybody. Nobody's going to be excluded. If you want to use the Starbucks bathroom, come and use it. Well, here's a picture, folks. It's a black and white photo of this gentleman. He has the baby changing table open. And what is he doing? He is preparing a very hot load of heroin to be injected directly into his veins. How loving, how tolerant is the left that they are making sure that this drug addict, this addict messing with God knows one of the most lethal drugs in the world, has a safe space so that he could safely go into a bathroom, put down a baby changing table, and inject a hot load of heroin into his veins, and then lie down on that beautifully cleaned porcelain and tiled and linoleum floors, and just sit there and convulse for the next 45 minutes to 2 hours while people are waiting online. Paying customers are waiting online to use that restroom. But that doesn't matter, those paying customers. What matters is that Johnny Boy over here was able to get his high and get his fix. Oh, how loving it is, Paul. It's so loving when I see stuff like this. I'm elated that Starbucks is doing this.
Do you know what though? I think the problem is there's a kind of bigger, broader context to all this. Is in all the coming changes, when we have all the eventual culmination of the reset and this massive paradigm shift, is there's so many people out there who feel them out there, you know, have a very comfortable existence, that suddenly that is going to change dramatically.
Yep.
And therefore, and you're going to have this huge kind of socio-economic shift that's going to shock a lot of people. And people in this kind of first world where people in the West believe they are largely clueless as to what's going to happen, but they're going to find out pretty soon. And for a lot of them, it's not going to be very pretty because they've got everything invested in paper markets and paper assets. And, and I think there's a thing that, and it's true, the happiest, most grounded people that you ever meet are the ones that, don't believe in having, but believe in being and living.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people who are going to have that sort of sobering thought and change in their whole mentality as to what's going on. So there's I think that's something that is going to become a major, major feature. And in a way people will either have to embrace change, or change will crush them in the process. And I think when we have people complaining about these things going on in Starbucks, the question is, how many of these people might end up, I'm not saying like the person taking drugs or something, but how many of these people are going to end up in a similar situation where they're really, really, suddenly they've gone from their comfort zone to having nothing relatively. And how are they going to handle that and deal with that?
Absolutely. Absolutely correct, man. Absolutely correct. There has to be a rapid mindset change. And it's I was driving around town a few days ago, a beautiful day, and I was just driving around, had the windows down, and just moving from an affluent place of the part of the town that I'm in to the more ghetto place. And I'm saddened because some of these buildings are these old brownstone houses that have been around since the 1900s, 1920s. These were one of the most desirable properties along the New York's Hudson River Valley. Just amazing, amazing properties. When captains of industries used to live there. I mean, there were hotels where aristocrats would come and vacation in, and now it's all like crack houses. It's basically a Democrat's paradise. Everywhere the Democrats go, they destroy. They absolutely make into an absolute crap hole wherever they are. And I thought to myself, driving through this entire just a dilapidated part of the place where I live. I don't live there, but it's next town over. I was thinking to myself, I was like, you have an entire generation gone. Okay, an entire generation, which is the millennials. I mean, there are swaths of millennials that are awoken to they're aware and awake to what is going on in the world. But the vast majority of millennials are idiots. They're the most useless generation to have ever been born on the face of this planet. The most useless. And I'm not talking about kids young people or millennials who listen to programs such as this. I'm talking about just the out there mainstream millennial is an idiot, lacking severely in skills. And I was very upset at the fact that these crazy far left policies and politics is what's created this. Then I was also thinking about ethnic groups, minority groups that have been absolutely disenfranchised because they are lied to. They are led by Judas goats. They are led by sheep-dipped Judas goats who belong to the far left establishment. And they're kept on these mental plantations without any sort of room to grow. And it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. And Paul, my hope and prayer is, along with you, is that with this coming geopolitical and the geoeconomical, most importantly, reset, that all these things need to get purged. I mean, we are a festering system in the West. It really is. Our currencies are toxic. Our economies are debt addled. I mean, the G7, I like to call them the insolvent seven. You know, when you look at every single swath, we are literally, our economies are held together by electronic duct tape. Our military and military operations globally are pushed out there, not utilizing high tech or spectrum dominating weapons platforms. No, they're just put and pushed out there, and more funding on weapons is done. And why? How? Through sheer marketing and propaganda. That's all it is. We have become a paper tiger in the fullest sense of the word, Paul. A paper tiger with a third world economy to match. The only thing that is missing here is a third world currency. And Paul, you and I both know that is going to be remedied very soon.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting. One of the, excuse me, sorry about that. One of the subjects we've got up for discussion is the whole getting us, the second special counsel involved. Associated with everything that's unraveled recently in the US. Now, I think it's worth putting a bit of context in from my own perspective. The whole draining the swamp thing, back when Trump was elected in 2016, he made the point that his whole job was to take a wrecking ball to the cabal, and that remains the case. And I think it's worth reiterating that. And everyone's got very impatient, and I understandably, I know why people are impatient to see some tangible progress. But we've said this many times, the likes of the FBI, the CIA, even the DOJ, and everyone else, the mainstream media for that matter, are all in the crosshairs, and that is becoming more and more self-evident. My only slight concern, and I think there might be a rational explanation for this, we're seeing a lot of emphasis put on Democrats, the Obama administration, Clinton. What about the neocons and the Republicans? Because there's certainly dirty elements on both sides of the equation. Now, I think there are reasons for why it makes sense that we're not really paying much attention to that, because the incumbent President Trump is part of the Republican Party, and that's just one obvious thing. So, but there is a huge amount of focus just on the Democrats and that draining the swamp, but there's a whole draining the swamp on the other side of the that needs to be addressed. And parking the issue of Trump's foreign policy, which I do have concerns about, the draining the swamp internally, I think, remains on course, and it's better, from my perspective, to allow them to impale themselves. And I think gradually, that they're coming out with comments, and in the process, they're just shining the spotlight more and more on them. We'll talk about the issue, because we can talk about the special counsel or the requirement to have another special counsel. But I think whatever we think is going on currently, you can guarantee it's going to go far, far wider and deeper than is currently understood. And that's for very obvious reasons. And I think the wider the scope, the wider the spotlight, you're going to have dog eat dog in the swamp sense, as they're going to consume each other. And in the process of consuming each other, the net will grow wider and wider, and they'll consume each other even more. My only biggest question in all this is, and well, there's two things. As this progresses, bearing in mind, rather like the UK, how many people in the US in reality really understand what's going on? I think there are increasing numbers, and that's encouraging. But like any Western nation, the vast majority are largely still ignorant of what's going on. Now, how is this going to be documented? How is it going to be people made to understand what is actually happening? So the average British person, the average European, or in this case, with all the developments in the US, the average American person, how are they going to be able to understand what is going on and put the context in terms of what is actually happening? And how are they going to react when they realize the magnitude of, I mean, they'll have heard draining the swamp, and then there'll be people who have latched onto that and learned things, as people who haven't. But when they realize the magnitude of it and what it actually entails, how is the average American going to respond to that? And there are things that concern me even more than the ongoing developments. The ongoing developments are very interesting, and and certainly are increasingly. And I think the whole idea of this investigation into why the FBI, the CIA, and God knows who else, and anyone else was had the Trump campaign under surveillance is another huge example. But I think this is the tip of many, many icebergs, and it's how you make people understand that in tangible ways, and also how are they going to react? Because it's like anything, if you suddenly have 300 million people in a nation suddenly going, hang on, we had Watergate, and certain generations will remember that very clearly, but we've got something that I think is quite legitimately and arguably far greater than Watergate. How is 300 million people going to react to that when they realize what's actually going on? Because they're going to be angry, they're going to be frustrated, they're going to be upset. Where are they going to direct that to? And I think that for me is a big concern.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think it is a big concern where they're going to invent their things. But you don't know something though. It's like there's a good 160 million people that have voted for Trump. And probably that number has probably grown even more, the more as even the most biased of opinion polls are showing Trump's approval rating to be quite high at this point. I think there's a great deal of Americans. I think at this point, I think a good majority, I would say, of Americans, I'd say a good 60% of the country is really pissed off as to what's going on. I think there's 40% of the country that is completely and totally gone. I don't think they'll ever wake up. I think their minds are completely gone, Paul. I think there's no recourse for these people. I think they've gone into a point of political reprobation, mentally speaking, where they're incapable because they're so inured by the paradigm, this false narrative that they've been told their entire life. And when that reality is snatched and peeled away from them, and their icons, their political icons, the Clintons, so many of these members of the deep state, when they go down, what is going to be their recourse? These crazies. And that's a very good question here, man. That's a very, very good question. What will these crazies do? Because they are nuts, Paul. They're absolutely certified.
Oh, absolutely, undoubtedly. And I do agree. That's why I said I think increasing numbers of people in the US have. Trump's done a great job in waking a lot of people, even the people who don't agree with it. Yeah. At least they're listening to what he's saying. Okay, they might rant and rave about it and not like it, but at least on some level they're listening and engaging in that. And of course, you're absolutely right. There's no doubt about it. Trump won the last election by a significantly larger majority. I mean, they talk about rigging the election. Yeah, they tried to rig it, and he still won. I mean, I think it's, from my understanding, he probably won by maybe 30%. It was a huge landslide victory.
Yeah. Right.
So I do agree with you. I think there's a lot of people who absolutely have been engaged by what he said, and that has helped massively. But I think it's just a question of how people will react to the extent of it. And as I said, I do have concerns that and I understand why, from Trump's perspective, he can't focus too much on what's going on in terms of the neocons and the Republicans. But I understand that. But I do hope at some point there is a rounded shift towards draining the swamp, because it applies across the entire political process and beyond, and all the organizations like the CIA, etc., that support that mechanism. And of course, it's not everyone in all these organizations either. But I don't think it's going to be a problem. But it's something, when I think of something, even if it seems highly unlikely, we don't want to see a situation where, they drain the swamp and all the light shone on certain parts and certain aspects, the light isn't shone on it. Because to drain the swamp, you have to clear it completely. You can't go, well, actually, we'll just get rid of 3/4 of it and the other quarter will leave. Now, I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that's going to happen. But lately, I've seen a huge amount of focus on Democrats' side of the equation. And I'm going, at what point are we going to see the focus shift onto the Republican side and the neocons? And we know from experience, as many people listening do, that there's a lot of very nasty elements within the neocons, for sure. And their involvement. And I think certainly they've had some far too much influence recently in terms of US foreign policy. for all the reasons why we were concerned by the likes of Pompeo and Bolton. And, Pompeo did this huge 180 shift on Iran. All of a sudden, that concerns me because he was very measured, when he was in the CIA. In fact, often he was seen as someone who wasn't playing ball and was not playing devil's advocate, but certainly questioning a lot of the official narrative. And now suddenly he's just gone full throttle the other way. And he's made a lot of comments recently that have got a lot of people inside Europe and beyond going, where's he going with this? What the hell is he saying this for? Mm. Because there's no substance to back it up. And the reaction from the European Union over his speech was savage. So, when he made the comments on Monday with regards to Iran, the reaction's been very, very animated. And that's pretty unusual. I mean, you cannot often get, publicly people will make a diplomatic comment. Privately, they might be animated, but when they're publicly very animated, that gives you an indication. I think they're a bit sort of dumbfounded as to how he's had that shift. So, in the end, it might all play out and everything works out fine. But at the moment, they are concerned, and I don't want to see the idea that neocon elements and everything they've been involved in the past somehow goes unpunished, and there's no kind of retribution for what they've done and their involvement in the past. It's not, the Obama administration was an absolute nightmare, and no one's going to doubt that. But plenty of things went on prior to that. I mean, classic example is what administration was in when we had 9/11.
Yeah,
who was involved in that? I mean, that's one of the most damning, shocking things that's happened in US history, or certainly modern history. Where's the accountability for that and everyone who was involved in that? And so there's all those kind of things and I think eventually, of course, all being well, those things will get dealt with as well. But otherwise, if they don't get dealt with, then you're just going to have the Democrats smashed into oblivion and totally humiliated, disgraced, and the elements within the Republicans, if they weren't dealt with, are just going to carry on like regardless. And that can't be allowed to happen. And I'm not saying it will be, and I'm optimistic it won't be. But the longer it drags on and we don't hear, the narrative's all about the Democrats, all about the Obama administration. And no doubt the focus is on that because of what's now transpired with all this surveillance that was going on of the Trump campaign. And undoubtedly it needs that. But at some point, the spotlight needs shining on everywhere. And if you're going to drain the swamp, it has to be in totality.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it has to be. Paul, here's something that's been tickling in the back of my mind for me for a little while, and that is Mohammed bin Salman. He has not been seen since the April 21st multiple gunshots heard in the Saudi palace. Has not been seen anywhere. What is your take on that? Is MBS dead? Is he wounded? Is he in hiding? What is going on? What are your sources?
Well, actually, I talked with this on Monday with CJ. Yeah, no worries. No, I mean the issue is, well, and you rightly point out, is that what exactly happened, and we don't know. I mean, certainly he seems to have disappeared off the radar. It's not clear what went on with regards to that. Well, maybe it was a coup, or maybe it wasn't a coup attempt. There's lots of different things. It was a drone strike. Then there's other people saying, no, there was an actual coup attempt. Now there's a lot of talk about the fact that the deposed crown prince, there's concerns that he might try and start another coup. And then there's an idea that a lot of the Saudi royals are not being allowed to leave because there's a fear of a coup happening. And there's disgruntled people abroad making rumblings about coups. And I don't know, but the question is, it's one of three things. He's either in hiding, he's either been deposed as the crown prince, or, he's dead. I mean, I think in very crude terms, there are the three possibilities. Now, he might well just be in hiding. He might well have just disappeared off the radar, but he's very, publicity seeking, no doubt about it. And I think, as I said to CJ, the thing that interested me particularly was the fact that the Saudis made the comment regarding the US embassy in Jerusalem, and actually came out and really sort of savagely criticised the fact the US had moved it there and denounced it and said they wouldn't, recognise that as being a legitimate move. Well, that is very out of sync with MBS's attitude when he's been, cozying up with the Israelis and trying to put this big détente together, even though we know they've been, allies for a long time, but publicly doing so, and going out of his way to sort of charm the US in the process. So why suddenly has Riyadh made these really pretty contentious comments that no doubtedly would have upset the Saudis and the Israelis and the US. So yeah, it remains to be seen. But obviously, if he has been deposed or worse than that, then the question is, what does that mean for Saudi Arabia? And the question is, we don't know. I mean, we know King Salman's very pro-Russia and pro-China. Does that mean that that would start to figure more prominently? Do we really understand what's going on between Saudi and the Chinese in terms of the petro-yuan? Nothing's absolutely clear at this stage. But yeah, it's very strange that he was always wanting to hog the limelight and he's disappeared now for over 4 weeks.
It really is. It really is. Paul, what is your take on the Iran situation as more rhetoric is coming out towards Iran? I mean, the other day we had Pompeo speaking about the Iranian sanctions, talking about even a potential strike on Iran. What is your take?
Yeah, it's funny actually, because we talked about this with CJ as well.
Darn it, I'm late to the party. Save something for me, Paul.
I mean, let's kind of be quite brief about this, because we don't want to kind of cover everything we covered on Monday. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of rhetoric. The bottom line is the Iranians are not going to kowtow to the US. They're not going to back down. And why aren't they going to back down? Because even if the European Union walks away and then buckles under pressure, at the moment they don't seem to be, but they could buckle next week, next month. We don't know. If they don't buckle, then it's all bets are off, and their rotation east to the Russia and China is a given at some point anyway, but it will just accelerate it hugely. And in the event-driven scenario, that's a massive step in that direction. But if the European Union walks away, the one thing they know is they've got China. We've said this many times. They've got China's back, or China's got their back economically and Russia militarily, and neither of those nations is going to allow the nation to collapse. There is no doubt there is a big move to try and create a regime change. I mean, there's a Twitter, thread about Iran regime change, and there's probably a lot of bogus accounts created to give this idea that half of the Iranian population wants regime change. There's a big emphasis, and that's always what it has been. And that's why I get rather concerned, because we know for decades that's been the idea, is to have regime change in Iran. And Pompeo, people will argue, maybe he's just saying things, maybe it's rhetoric, but I don't think I've ever heard someone without actually saying we want regime change. But everything he said on Monday pointed exactly to that. That is rather a disturbing development, because the one reality is they won't succeed. And all it will end up doing is alienating the US more and more. And we come back to the point, from my perspective, yeah, it's one thing smashing the dollar and ending the cabal, but it's another thing alienating everyone in the world in the process. Don't do that. And what they're doing in terms of Iran is they won't succeed. They won't win. Iran survived it in the 70s or the late 70s, obviously the 80s, 90s. They're far stronger now, and they've got far stronger allies. So therefore, it's just it's a fool's errand to believe that they're going to affect any change in that regard. And so I think the rhetoric will carry on. I think it remains to be seen what the European Union really does end up doing. I mean, they're talking tough, and there's enough suggestions to say they'll stick to that. Because the problem, of course, is if the European Union caves in, then there's a lot of vultures inside the European Union who are desperate to see the end of it. If they cave in and collapse, the ramifications could be catastrophic for the European Union, because that might be the straw that breaks the European Union's back in the process, because they've made such a big play of trying to support this and keep the whole JCPOA initiative going.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul, what is the big things right now on your radar?
Well, actually, I
what is
think one of
keeping
the
you up at night?
Oh, nothing keeps me up at night. Yeah, even when I hear some outrageous things that.
So I'm afraid to ask you some of these topic questions because you probably already covered it on Monday.
No,
I don't know what to ask you.
No. I mean, one of the things that you've got listed was this whole cracks in the global economy, and we absolutely know. I mean, yeah, we tend to pick on the US a lot, principally because it has the world's reserve currency, but all Western nations, to varying degrees, are in meltdown. I mean, their economies are fake. Their unemployment rates are way higher, and there are systemic problems that can manifest themselves. I mean, it's like if some major problem starts in Europe and it consumes Europe, it'll consume obviously the US and North America and so on in the process, and those cracks are becoming chasms everywhere. And yeah, they'll keep propping everything up as long as they can, and they can keep propping markets up. They can drive the Dow and the FTSE and the DAX and everything to infinity, but economic reality is biting hard, and you can only do this so long. And of course, ultimately, the question is, once the dollar's rejected, that it's game over, because they're not going to be able to pump trillions of dollars when no one will accept them. But I came across something interesting, which I think highlights kind of beautifully the problems that nations like the US are facing. I mean, we all know the US has got their strategic petroleum reserves. No one's going to exactly say, potentially I think you can have up to 160 million barrels in it. Well, this may surprise people, but recently they sold 700,000 barrels of it partly to pay for a 2 billion modernization of the underground salt dome cavern system along the US Gulf Coast. Now, if they're having to sell, the strategic petroleum reserves to pay for something, or pay a down payment on something that's a 2 billion modernization, what does that tell us about the state of the economy? I mean, that is as dire as it can get. So, and that's, it's all over. If you go to the UK, I mean, the retail sector's in free fall. Go to the average high street, half the shops are, there's no boarded up, there's no one there. The economic reality is killing the Western world, simply because Japan told everyone, if you have QE and zero interest rate policy for more than a few months, you're going to kill the economy, stone dead. The other obvious thing is that you can't have raise interest rates now, because you'll kill a debt-based economies. So yeah, the whole idea of the cracks in the global economy, undoubtedly, absolutely it is. But the US markets all go, they'll fall 400 points, and everyone goes, oh, it's the beginning of the end. And then what do we find? The Dow's I'm not sure where it was back over 25,000 again. They'll keep manipulating it. And whilst somebody will accept dollars, and the problem is increasingly that is not the case. And the Exchange Stabilization Fund is buying up all these dollars because no one else wants them. That's the reality. So it's there's all these off-book dollars that are sort of, and then how do they handle those? Eventually the wheels will fall off in totality, and it won't just be in the US. And ironically, of course, it could be some contagion effect in Europe that is the trigger for it, and then brings everything else down in the process, never mind the culmination of the reset. But the one thing with the reset is, or the culmination of it, because we are in the middle of it, is it's event driven. No one can stop it. It's a train that's just going to keep chugging along. And when we reach the end of the event driven scenario, then we have the culmination of it. Because for me, I kind of raised the point, well, let's say for argument's sake, Trump has the midterm. I mean, the last thing Trump wants is the US economy to do a 2008 on steroids just before the midterms, because no one's going to forgive him, and he's going to get blamed. And how many people are going to then vote for the Democrats just on the basis that they think he's wrecked the economy? And my thought process is, well, is there anything that could delay this event-driven scenario? And maybe, you know, if something was, I'm not saying it's going to happen, by the way, because I don't know. But for argument's sake, if it was to happen around the time of the midterms, is there any way that it can be stalled? And the answer is no. So I'm not saying it's going to happen then, but if it was going to happen, it's not going to get delayed to stop Trump being steamrolled in the midterms if that scenario ever came to pass. So it's a train that just will chug along, and when the dominoes have all been flipped, then the final switch is pulled, and that's the end of it, and that's the death of the dollar and the end of the cabal in totality, and everything else is part of that event-driven scenario that's happening. So, yeah, the cracks in the global economy have been in place for a decade nearly a decade since the 2008 crisis. So nothing's changed, and they'll just paper over the cracks, rather like the European Central Bank and what they're doing. I mean, they're still making QE purchases. I don't even know what they're buying anymore. I mean, what are they buying bonds in? It's debatable. I mean, what's left? Because I think they've exhausted all the sovereign debt. So, but yeah, it's just the same old, and it will keep chugging along. So that's why the stock market's irrelevant.
Yeah,
I wouldn't worry about the stock market. There'll be ebbs and flows. Eventually, where it will capitulate, but it will only capitulate at the 9th hour when everything's about to go. You know, the culmination of the reset, basically.
Sure, absolutely. Paul, my final question to you, unless you've already answered this on Monday. The situation in Israel. You know, there's a lot of controversy now that there's people were holding up pictures. These are Photoshop pictures of the new temple that they've been wanting for God knows how long, on top of the Alaska Mosque. And the situation there is getting really intense. What's your take on that? Unless, of course, you've already answered this on Monday with CJ, Paul.
No, we didn't.
Right,
we
good.
didn't go.
What's your take?
Yeah, I mean, I think Israel is in a very precarious position. I think there is no doubt that Netanyahu's own, just let's talk about it domestically, I think he's under more and more pressure. There's been, from what I understand from someone I know who's there's been a lot of demonstrations against Netanyahu. People want rid of him. They don't want him, you know, in power anymore. So there's all the controversy and all the, you know, he may, of course, he denies all these allegations, but the allegations aren't going away, and neither are the investigations.
Right.
So undoubtedly, I think internally he's got major problems. There's no doubt that he certainly is starting to feel more and more isolated in the Middle East. I mean, and you know, this banking on the US to back him up over Iran is futile. I mean, we saw the situation where, yeah, there was an Israeli response, but there was at least 20 missiles were fired into Israel and hit targets in the Golan Heights region, and the Israeli response was pretty mute, really. So I think there's a realization for all the bluster that there's nothing they can do anymore. I mean, apparently, I think somewhere there was I don't know whether it's somewhere in the Senate, maybe, I don't know, Congress, I'm not sure it was, who was trying to draft a bill that the US recognizes the Golan Heights belongs to the Israelis. And it's, you know, even though we know historically that the Israelis confiscated the Golan Heights off the Syrian. And why do the Israelis want it? Because there's the most ginormous point. Yeah, but also there's the biggest enormous oil reserves.
Correct.
The Syrians have got more oil reserves than the Saudis.
Yeah.
And of course it is. Yeah, it was the energy pipelines, also the oil. So yeah, I think they're just more and more. It's becoming more and more fractured, and regrettably, from the average Israeli standpoint, the question is, Netanyahu's policy is doing nothing to help them, the average Israeli, citizen, and I think it is. I think internally he's very stretched. He's very vulnerable and isolated. I think increasingly, yeah, okay, the US is supporting him to whatever extent that is, and there's all this controversy. Well, what does the US really mean? Well, they certainly supported him over the business of Iran, and we know that all the evidence he produced was evidence the IAEA have had for years. There was nothing new in it, but it was used partly as a justification, and also obviously the massive controversy of moving the US embassy to Jerusalem. There is a school of thought, and I think there's some validity to this, that by doing it, it's forcing the hand of the Israelis and the Palestinians to resolve the two-state solution. I don't think anyone in the Israeli government's going to do anything about that. And do you know what? Truthfully, I don't think anyone on the Palestinian side is. I think there's elements in both camps who like things to be the way they are and don't want a two-state solution, because it's rather like North and South Korea. When that resolves itself, the warmongers are going to go, oh, hang on, we have no purpose here, and everyone will say, right, well, pack up your bags and go home. It's the same if the Israel and Palestine issue is dealt with in a mature, sensible, adult fashion. There's going to be a lot of people who got a lot of vested interest to see the madness carry on there. And that, of course, when that ends, they've got no justification or vindication to carry on doing what they're doing. So, and I don't see, and I think Trump made that point to Netanyahu publicly. He said, "Do you really want peace?" And I think Trump knows the reality of things. I think part of the Iranian thing is, and it's rather like the Syrians, Trump cares deeply about people. And I think he's very easily duped into the humanitarian side of things. And that's why he'll make decisions. And that's why he went into Syria and said, okay, let's launch this, missile attack, because, yeah, Assad has launched chemical weapons against his people, and he's horrified by that. And okay, we can all sit there and go, well, we know full well that wasn't the case. But it's always the humanitarian angle. If you ever hear Trump talk about other nations, he does focus a lot on the humanitarian side because he does care about people. And I think, that's his strength, but it's also he's been manipulated, and it's been made to be partly a weakness. And it's not a weakness in him, but it's a weakness in how people are able to manipulate his thought processes about what needs to be done in certain parts of the world, particularly the Middle East. But I think Israel is becoming weaker and weaker, and the question is, are they going to lash out? I just don't think that's going to happen. I think there's a lot of rhetoric, but what are they going to do? I mean, if they try to launch an attack on Iran, the US is not going to back them up. There's no way. And I think when push comes to pull, when it really, really matters, if Netanyahu had some idea of launching some serious attack against Iran, the US will actually do everything in the Trump administration to stop him doing that, or any other, what you might term an attack on, maybe in Syria, that's just totally disproportionate to what they've done. Not that where anyone's justifying the missile attacks that have happened so far by any stretch of the imagination, but something on a completely different level. I think the Trump administration would go, that's a bridge too far. We're not going there. I think even the hardest line elements within the Trump administration who want regime change, they want the Iranians to do it. They're not going to go in and do anything military. Yeah, they'll try and squeeze them economically, and they'll try and do everything to have a more sympathetic administration inside Tehran that they feel then they can utilize, because really at the end of the day, their biggest fear is that they're rotating east. They're rotating to the Russians and the Chinese, and they're going to de-dollarize. And here's the point. When did things really explode? And it always happens. We had Gaddafi, who said, I want a gold-backed African dinar. We had Saddam Hussein who goes, I want to sell my oil in euros. And then we hear the Iranians go, we're dumping the dollar and trading in euros. There's always a precedent. If you threaten King Dollar, then that's the tipping point. And I think really that's what it's about. It's the whole preservation of the dollar. Well, of course, if they want nations to keep King Dollar going, then don't do what they do to them. And that's the irony. Walking away from the JCPOA is going to only accelerate the very thing they want to prevent. And that's, people disagree, and I know people have disagreed with me. But one of the big points about the JCPOA was precisely because they went, if we walk away from this and we don't do anything with the Iranians, okay, there's the risk the Iranians will make enriched uranium and make nuclear weapons. Well, okay, there was always a possibility of that. But it's more to do with the fact they recognized the Iranians will dump the dollar. They'll go and trade with the Russians and the Chinese. And we can't afford to then be having to look at sanctioning some nations like China in the process because they want to trade with the Iranians. And they were terrified that because even they know if the dollar dies, they're finished. Now, there's a lot of people inside the US who never believe that's going to happen, but certainly elements within the Obama administration believe that was a real distinct possibility. That was one of the main driving reasons behind why the JCPOA came about. Now, there's this whole argument whether all these little side deals going on and bribes and kickbacks and all this sort of thing. Well, there's no evidence to suggest that happened or didn't happen. But the point is that's not really the issue. They're all just sort of little side issues that don't really reflect on what the whole issue. Yeah, okay, maybe things did happen, maybe they didn't. The reality is it came about because the Obama administration went, dollar's going to get killed. And if the dollar gets killed, it's game over for the US. That was one of the big motivations that came about. Whether anything else happened on the side for me is largely irrelevant and is not a reason why the deal was broken or should have stayed in place. But the rest of the nations, including Russia and China particularly, okay, if you want to call the EU and the UK, France and Germany cabal nation, the Chinese and the Russians aren't. So why do they want to keep the deal going? Because after all, who benefits the most, whether the deal stays in place? Russia and China. If the deal isn't in place, they benefit even more. So why are they so keen to keep the deal in place? Because they're not cabal nations. Everyone knows that definitively. So that's where the whole argument, there was some big grand cabal deal in this. There's no way China and Russia would have ever signed up to that. Yeah, there may have been some, and I'm sure there's other international things that have happened in the past where there's backhanders, there's strange deals, side deals going on, but that doesn't actually make any tangible difference to the actual deal itself. It's not a deal maker or a deal breaker if those things happen or don't happen. But as I go back, if you think Russia and China are cabal nations, then fair enough, they're part of the grand conspiracy. But then we know they're not. So why do they want to keep the deal going? Because they're better off with the deal dead. But they're fighting tooth and nail to keep the deal going. That's the question. If you believe there's some grand cabal conspiracy, well, please answer that question. If people have got a great answer, I'd like to hear it. But thus far, no one's given me any answer to explain that big, huge question mark that is unanswerable.
Absolutely. Very well said. Paul, we're at the end of the program. Closing comments and how can people follow you? In fact, probably everybody on here is already following you, but yeah, go
ahead. Well, obviously, yeah, it's the seriousreport.com, and yeah, everyone knows we have the podcast. If you want to subscribe, and we'd like you to, then please consider doing so. We've actually, things have gone off even in a bigger dimension than we've had previously, because literally we are drowning in stuff that we could cover on a daily basis. So 10 to 15 minutes is now 15 to 20 minutes. And the truth is, I could probably do a 2-hour podcast every day. Yeah. Not that I would do, because people would go mad and no one wants to listen to me rambling on for 2 hours. But the point is, it's the acceleration of what's happening and all the events, and that's what we do. And we don't discuss things on here that we put in the podcasts. I mean, occasionally, maybe months later, I'll make some reference to something, but we don't do that because people pay for a service and we wouldn't do that to them. But yeah, we'd appreciate if you do that and to subscribe. And obviously we have increasingly we don't really use the Facebook page, but we've got the Twitter account, which we've used a little bit more intensively than we used to. And obviously we appreciate everything that Rogue Money's done by having us come on and every week. And it's always an absolute pleasure to be on. And it was great. CJ got in touch, said, have you got some time? And it worked out well. So yeah, we always love doing it, and it's always really good and fun to do it as well. And it's great to be able to discuss all the things that we do. And thanks very much as ever.
Absolutely. And with that being said, guys, we're all done. I think at 1:00 we might have the guys over at Rogue Coin come on with the crypto trades. So keep it tuned over here. With that being said, we're over and out. Take it away, CJ.